The diplomatic shuttle's landing sequence was unnecessarily complex, a deliberate display of Krell technological superiority that impressed precisely no one at Forward Operating Base Thunderhead. Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson watched through high-resolution optical systems, his augmented tactical contacts parsing every minute detail of the alien vessel's approach. Prince Zeravex represented more than just a diplomatic exchange. He was a living symbol of the Krell Imperium's most recent diplomatic overture, following the catastrophic electromagnetic collapse of the Proxima Centauri colonies. 3 standard planetary cycles ago, a massive solar event had obliterated an entire Krell frontier settlement. 12 million lives erased in less than 17 minutes. The incident exposed critical vulnerabilities in Krell defensive technologies, forcing their high command into an unprecedented position of diplomatic vulnerability. The prince's 6-fingered hands moved with practiced aristocratic grace as he adjusted the neural-linked communication implant at the base of his skull. Holographic data streams danced across his retinal display, showing environmental analysis, base security protocols, and a detailed psychological profile of the human military personnel he was about to encounter. What the prince didn't know was that his own psychological profile was already being dissected by Thompson and a team of military behavioral specialists. Years of interstellar conflict and cross-species diplomatic exchanges had taught Earth's military one crucial lesson. First contact was always a dance of perception and subtle psychological warfare. Zeravex's exoskeleton rippled with bioluminescent patterns, a complex language of status and emotional subtext incomprehensible to human eyes. To the untrained observer, he might have looked like an elaborate living sculpture, iridescent blue-green scales overlapping in intricate patterns, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with a posture that screamed inherited privilege and genetic superiority. The base's reception team looked decidedly unimpressed. A mixed unit of Army Rangers and Air Force tactical specialists stood in precise formation, their diverse backgrounds a stark contrast to the genetically homogeneous Krell military caste. Thompson stood slightly forward, his weathered face a map of experiences that no genetic enhancement could replicate. "Welcome to Earth, Prince Zeravex." Thompson's voice was deliberately neutral, professional without being deferential. "I'm Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson. You'll be our primary liaison and training candidate for the next solar cycle." The prince's translator implant converted Thompson's words, but something in the tone suggested meanings beyond the literal translation. Zeravex's secondary neural clusters, responsible for advanced linguistic and cultural interpretation, detected layers of potential challenge in those simple words. Base Commander Lisa Rodriguez watched from a tactical observation point, her hand resting casually near a communication panel that could, if necessary, initiate planetary defense protocols. The Krell were allies now, but military protocol demanded perpetual preparedness. Zeravex knew the statistics. Humans were a relatively young spacefaring civilization. Their technological development was exponential but chaotic. They had no unified genetic enhancement program, no centralized breeding protocols, no systematic approach to military development. By all rational Krell metrics, humans should have been a footnote in galactic civilization. And yet, they weren't. Something about these humans had caught the attention of multiple galactic civilizations, something ineffable and unpredictable. The prince's mission was to understand that something, a task that would prove far more challenging than he could possibly imagine. As he stepped onto human soil for the first time, Prince Zeravex had no idea that his entire understanding of civilization, warfare, and personal potential was about to be systematically dismantled. The obstacle course looked deceptively simple, a 2.7-mile circuit designed to test every conceivable physical and mental limitation. It wound through terrain that shifted from dense forest to rocky inclines, urban simulation zones, and treacherous mud fields. Standard Krell assessment protocols would have involved precise genetic performance metrics, carefully calculated stress responses, and predetermined success parameters. This was different. Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson's eyes gleamed with a predatory anticipation as he watched Prince Zeravex approach the starting line. The prince's exoskeletal armor, a marvel of Krell biotechnology, hummed with integrated neural networks and adaptive protection systems. Each scale could theoretically redistribute kinetic energy, adjust thermal signatures, and provide instantaneous self-repair. "You'll start when I say go," Thompson announced, his voice cutting through the morning mist. "No specialized equipment. Standard human training gear only." Zeravex's translator implant caught the subtle challenge in Thompson's tone. A standard-issue human combat uniform was little more than reinforced synthetic fabric, primitive by Krell standards. The prince's initial medical scan had revealed his baseline physical capabilities were approximately 287% more efficient than peak human performance. This would be embarrassingly easy. The first segment tested raw physical endurance, a series of climbing walls, rope traverses, and sudden terrain shifts designed to break rhythm and test adaptability. Zeravex approached with calculated precision, his enhanced musculature allowing him to scale obstacles with mathematical efficiency. Until he didn't. A deliberately placed mud pit, seemingly innocuous, contained a complex array of hidden resistance mechanisms. Electromagnetic pulses disrupted his exoskeleton's neural links. Microscopic polymer tendrils created unexpected friction points. The prince discovered, much to his horror, that raw genetic enhancement meant nothing against deliberate environmental manipulation. Halfway through the course, Zeravex was no longer moving with aristocratic grace. Mud caked his once pristine exoskeleton. His breath came in ragged gasps, a biological response he'd been genetically conditioned to suppress. The human team watched, saying nothing, their collective silence more intimidating than any verbal challenge. Thompson walked alongside the course, occasionally calling out specific instructions or subtle provocations. "Your genetic programming didn't account for unpredictability, did it?" he said, not as a question but a statement of fact. Each obstacle became a lesson in human military philosophy. Where Krell training emphasized individual superiority, this course demanded constant adaptation. Zeravex found himself doing something unprecedented, watching other participants, learning from their techniques, adjusting his approach in real time. A young staff sergeant named Maria Rodriguez demonstrated a technique for crossing a series of suspended platforms that defied everything in Zeravex's tactical database. She didn't just overcome the obstacle, she reimagined how the obstacle could be traversed. By the three-quarter mark, the prince's augmented vision was flickering. Internal diagnostic systems reported multiple suboptimal performance metrics. His genetic enhancements' carefully calibrated stress responses were completely overwhelmed. "You're learning," Thompson said, not unkindly. "Genetic superiority means nothing if you can't adapt." The final segment was a psychological crucible, a complex urban warfare simulation that transformed from desert environment to Arctic conditions in moments. Zeravex discovered that his carefully programmed combat responses were rigid, predictable, easy to manipulate. When he finally crossed the finish line, 3 hours after starting what should have been a 45-minute course, something fundamental had changed. The arrogant prince was gone. In his place was a student, raw, humbled, but burning with an unexpected fire of curiosity. Thompson's handheld diagnostic pad blinked with precise metrics, but the most important data wasn't numeric. It was the look in the alien prince's eyes, the first genuine spark of true understanding. Night descended on forward operating base Thunderhead with an oppressive intensity that seemed designed to challenge even the most resilient soldiers. For Prince Zeravex, the darkness brought something far more terrifying than physical challenge, a complete deconstruction of everything he understood about warfare and human psychology. The training facility's advanced holographic systems transformed the environment into a nightmare landscape that shifted between urban warfare zones, dense jungle terrain, and Arctic survival scenarios. Each simulation was more than a physical test. It was a psychological crucible designed to break down every preconceived notion of combat and survival. Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson stood in the observation room, his fingers dancing across a complex neural interface that controlled the simulation's parameters. Beside him, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the base's lead military psychologist, monitored Zaravex's physiological and neurological responses. "Watch how he processes uncertainty," Rodriguez commented, her voice clinical yet fascinated. "Krell military training eliminates uncertainty. We cultivate it." The current scenario was brutally elegant in its complexity. Zaravex found himself leading a small team through a simulated urban environment, where every decision carried potentially catastrophic consequences. Unlike Krell tactical protocols that emphasized hierarchical command structures, this exercise demanded constant communication, collective decision-making, and an almost organic adaptation to changing circumstances. A sudden explosion, simulated but devastatingly realistic, took out half the team. In Krell military doctrine, the loss would trigger a predetermined extraction protocol. Here, the remaining team members didn't just survive. They reimagined their entire mission objective in real time. Zaravex watched in growing confusion as Private Marcus Chen, a young soldier with no genetic enhancements, quickly assumed tactical leadership. The prince's neural interfaces tried to categorize the action, but found no matching protocol in his extensive database. "Leadership isn't about genetic superiority," Thompson's voice crackled through the communication system. "It's about reading the environment, understanding your team, and making decisions that keep everyone alive." Each hour of the simulation peeled back another layer of Zaravex's understanding. The humans didn't just fight. They told stories. Their communication was a complex tapestry of emotion, strategy, and shared experience. When Private Chen spoke about his grandmother's experiences during a historical conflict, it wasn't just conversation. It was a form of psychological fortification. The prince's translator struggled to capture the nuanced layers of human communication: sarcasm, humor, fear, hope. These weren't weaknesses to be eliminated, but tools of survival. A particularly intense scenario involved a hostage rescue situation, where traditional military tactics would guarantee multiple casualties. The human team's solution was so unconventional that Zaravex's tactical systems temporarily crashed, unable to process the approach. They used music, a carefully selected audio frequency, combined with specific communication patterns, created a psychological disruption in the simulated hostile environment. The hostage was rescued with 0 casualties, a scenario that defied every mathematical probability in Krell military calculation. Dr. Rodriguez watched the prince's neural patterns with scientific detachment. "He's experiencing cognitive dissonance," she told Thompson. "His entire understanding of military effectiveness is being systematically dismantled." As dawn approached, Zaravex emerged from the simulation changed. His exoskeleton, once a symbol of genetic superiority, now looked like nothing more than an elaborate shell, a metaphor for the rigid thinking he was beginning to shed. Thompson approached the exhausted prince, offering a simple canteen of water, a gesture more profound than any technical briefing. "You're starting to understand," he said simply. "Warfare isn't about who's strongest. It's about who can adapt fastest." Zaravex looked up, and for the first time, Thompson saw something beyond royal arrogance, a genuine desire to learn, to understand, to transform. The psychological warfare had begun in earnest. The multi-terrain rescue mission simulation began with calculated brutality. 30 kilometers of unforgiving landscape, a composite environment blending Arctic tundra, dense mountain forest, and treacherous rocky terrain. The objective was deceptively simple: extract a compromised reconnaissance team from a hostile zone while managing multiple simultaneous threats. Zaravex's first mistake was attempting to apply traditional Krell tactical protocols. "You're thinking like a machine," Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson's voice crackled through the communication system. "Think like a living, breathing ecosystem." The prince's tactical overlay showed multiple potential approaches, each more mathematically precise than the last. But the human team moved differently. They communicated not just through tactical channels, but through a complex language of gestures, brief verbal exchanges, and an almost telepathic understanding of each other's capabilities. Private Marcus Chen took point, his movement unlike any military approach Zeravex had ever witnessed. Each step was a calculated risk, each movement a potential life-saving decision. Beside him, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez maintained a constant low-level communication, her voice a steady thread of information and psychological support. Halfway through the mission, everything went catastrophically wrong. A simulated artillery strike, impossibly precise and devastatingly effective, took out their primary communication array and critically wounded Zeravex. His exoskeletal armor, once a symbol of Krell technological superiority, now hung in partially damaged fragments around his body. In Krell military doctrine, a wounded high-ranking officer would trigger an immediate extraction protocol. Sacrificing the mission to save the individual was standard procedure. The humans did something else entirely. "We're not leaving anyone behind," Chen stated. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a debate. It was a fundamental truth of their existence. Sergeant Rodriguez made a split-second decision that would have been considered tactical suicide by any Krell military standard. Instead of maintaining the original mission parameters, she restructured the entire team's approach. One team member became a human support system for Zeravex, while the others continued the extraction mission. The prince experienced something unprecedented. Where he expected to be viewed as a liability, he was instead treated as a critical part of the team's survival mechanism. Your genetic enhancements mean nothing if you can't work as part of a collective. Thompson's voice cut through the chaos. Survival isn't about individual superiority. It's about collective adaptation. Each moment challenged everything Zeravex understood about military engagement. The humans didn't just fight. They communicated, supported, transformed. When Chen used his own body to shield the prince during a simulated artillery bombardment, it defied every calculation in Zeravex's tactical database. The mission's final kilometers became a testament to human unpredictability. With limited resources, a wounded team member, and multiple environmental challenges, they didn't just survive. They reimagined survival itself. As they reached the extraction point, Zeravex realized something profound. The Krell's entire military philosophy was fundamentally broken. Genetic enhancement, technological superiority, hierarchical command structures. These were nothing compared to the human's ability to transform challenge into opportunity. Sergeant Rodriguez helped him to his feet, her action a language more complex than any verbal communication. "Welcome to real warfare," she said simply. The simulation ended, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time, Prince Zeravex understood that true strength wasn't about what you were born with, it was about what you could become together. The classroom was unlike anything in Krell military archives. No holographic interfaces, no genetically optimized learning pods, just raw human ingenuity embodied in physical space. Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson stood before a collection of historical artifacts that would fundamentally challenge everything Zeravex understood about military engagement. "Warfare isn't just about technology," Thompson began, his fingers tracing the outline of an ancient bronze shield. "It's about the stories we tell ourselves about survival." The walls were covered with images that defied Zeravex's understanding of military probability. The Spartan stand at Thermopylae, the Soviet resistance against Nazi invasion, the Vietnamese guerrilla tactics that defeated a technologically superior opponent. Each image was a testament to something the Krell considered impossible: victory through adaptation, rather than genetic or technological superiority. Dr. Elena Rodriguez joined the session, her approach both scientific and deeply human. "Look beyond the tactical," she instructed Zeravex. "Every conflict is a narrative of human potential." A holographic display revealed the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. African-American pilots who fought racism and technological limitations to become some of the most respected fighter pilots in World War I. The prince's neural interfaces struggled to categorize the information. These humans had overcome not just external enemies, but systematic oppression within their own society. Your people see warfare as a mathematical equation, Thompson explained. We see it as a living, breathing story of human potential. The historical lessons became a systematic deconstruction of Zaravex's worldview. Each example demonstrated how humans transformed apparent weaknesses into strengths. The Vietnamese used the landscape as a weapon. The Soviet resistance turned harsh winters into strategic advantages. The Tuskegee Airmen transformed discrimination into unbreakable unit cohesion. Private Marcus Chen brought a personal dimension to the lesson. He shared stories of his grandfather, a refugee who survived multiple conflicts, not through superior technology, but through adaptability, creativity, and an unbreakable human spirit. Technology fails, Chen said simply. Human potential doesn't. The prince's neural translators worked overtime, struggling to capture the nuanced layers of human communication. It wasn't just information being shared. It was a complex tapestry of emotion, experience, and collective memory. Thompson pulled out a simple object, a battered combat knife with intricate engravings. This belonged to my great-grandfather, he explained. It's not about the weapon. It's about the story behind it. The knife told a story of survival during the Korean War, how a soldier had used creativity and human connection to save his entire unit when technology failed. Zaravex's tactical systems couldn't process the illogical nature of the narrative. By all mathematical calculations, the scenario should have resulted in total unit destruction. Dr. Rodriguez watched the prince's neural patterns with scientific fascination. You're experiencing cognitive dissonance, she noted. Everything you understand about military engagement is being challenged. The final lesson of the day was perhaps the most profound. A comprehensive study of asymmetrical warfare, how smaller, less technologically advanced groups had consistently defeated seemingly invincible opponents throughout human history. Warfare is a story, Thompson concluded, and the most important weapon is the ability to reimagine that story in real time. As the session ended, Zaravex realized something fundamental had changed. The rigid neural pathways of his Krell training were breaking down, replaced by something far more dangerous and exciting: the human capacity for unlimited potential. For the first time, the prince understood that true strength wasn't about what you were born with, it was about what you could become. The observation room became Zaravex's sanctuary of transformation. Nights stretched into marathons of reflection, his neural interfaces working overtime to process the fundamental shift in his understanding of leadership, society, and personal potential. Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson noticed the change first. The prince no longer moved with the rigid, genetically programmed precision of Krell royalty. His movements became more fluid, more human. Late one night, as most of the base slept, Zaravex accessed the facility's extensive historical archives. His research was systematic, but increasingly passionate, diving deep into human social movements, military innovations, and personal stories of individual triumph against impossible odds. The Krell system of genetic hierarchy suddenly looked like an elaborate prison of limited potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez observed his psychological transformation with clinical precision. He's experiencing what humans call a paradigm shift, she told Thompson. Everything he understood about social structure is being dismantled. Zaravex began secret recordings, compiling evidence that would challenge the entire foundation of Krell social and military doctrine. Each conversation, each training exercise became a piece of a larger puzzle, proof that human potential defied every genetic calculation. A breakthrough came during an unexpected conversation with Private Marcus Chen. The young soldier shared stories of his family's immigration, of generations who had rebuilt their lives multiple times, transforming adversity into opportunity. Privilege isn't about what you're born with, Chen explained. It's about what you choose to do with your opportunities. The word struck Zarevex like a physical blow. His entire concept of royal status, a carefully maintained genetic and social hierarchy, began to crumble. Thompson deliberately increased the complexity of the prince's training. Psychological assessments, leadership simulations, team-building exercises that pushed beyond physical limitations and into the realm of emotional intelligence. Each challenge revealed more about human potential than any Krell scientific database could comprehend. During a particularly intense leadership simulation, Zarevex made a decision that would have been impossible weeks earlier. When faced with a scenario that traditionally demanded sacrificing team members for mission success, he chose a completely different approach, reimagining the entire mission objective to preserve human life. Leadership isn't about maintaining a hierarchy, he found himself explaining to his team. It's about creating a collective potential greater than any individual. The transformation wasn't just external. His neural interfaces began to modify themselves, developing new pathways of thinking that defied his original genetic programming. Where Krell technology sought to limit and control, human potential seemed to expand exponentially with each challenge. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez noticed something else. The prince was learning not just military tactics, but the subtle art of human connection. He began to understand that true leadership wasn't about giving orders, but about creating an environment where every individual could reach their maximum potential. Late one night, in a moment of unexpected vulnerability, Zarevex confronted Thompson about the fundamental difference between Krell and human approach to potential. "Your people don't just fight," he said, his translator capturing the complex emotional undertones. "You transform. Every challenge is an opportunity to become something more." Thompson's response was characteristically direct. "We don't believe in limitations," he said simply. "We believe in potential." As the solar cycle approached its final stages, Zarevex was no longer the arrogant prince who had arrived months earlier. He had become something else entirely. A bridge between two civilizations, carrying a revolutionary understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. The personal revolution was complete, and it was just beginning. The classified mission pushed the boundaries of human and alien military capabilities. Known internally as Operation Crucible, it represented the most complex training scenario ever designed. A multi-dimensional challenge that would test every aspect of Zarevex's transformed understanding of leadership and tactical engagement. The simulation area covered 500 square kilometers of artificially created terrain. Multiple environmental systems could shift instantaneously. Arctic tundra could become dense jungle. Urban landscapes could transform into desert environments within seconds. Traditional military tactics would be rendered completely useless. Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson and Base Commander Lisa Rodriguez watched from a secured observation point, their tactical interfaces monitoring every microscopic detail of the mission. "He's not the same prince who arrived months ago," Thompson observed, his voice a mixture of professional assessment and something closer to pride. The team Zarevex would lead represented the most diverse unit possible. Soldiers from different branches, backgrounds, and skill sets. Where a Krell commander would have seen chaos, the prince now saw potential. A living, breathing ecosystem of human capability. The mission's initial parameters were deliberately impossible. A compromised research station, multiple hostile environmental factors, limited resources, and a ticking clock that would trigger catastrophic consequences if not resolved within 72 hours. Zarevex's first move surprised even his human handlers. Instead of following the prescribed tactical approach, he gathered his team and did something unprecedented. He listened, not just to their verbal communications, but to the subtle language of body movement, emotional undertones, individual experiences. Private Marcus Chen's urban warfare expertise, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez's advanced medical training, Lieutenant David Kim's expertise in electromagnetic disruption. Each team member wasn't just a resource. They were a critical piece of a living, adaptive system. The first environmental shift came without warning. The research station's terrain transformed from a stable Arctic environment to a high-altitude, low-oxygen scenario. Traditional military protocols would have triggered an immediate extraction. Zarevex's team did something else entirely. "We adapt," he communicated, his voice a blend of calculated precision and human-learned emotional intelligence. Each challenge is an opportunity. They reconstructed their entire mission approach in real time. Chen's knowledge of high-altitude survival combined with Rodriguez's medical expertise created a survival strategy that defied all standard military calculations. Kim's electromagnetic expertise became a weapon of strategic adaptation. Thompson and Rodriguez watched in growing fascination as the prince demonstrated something beyond tactical brilliance. He was creating a living, breathing approach to problem-solving that transformed weakness into strength. When a simulated catastrophic system failure threatened to destroy the entire mission, Zarevex's response was quintessentially human. He didn't just solve the problem. He reimagined the entire objective, turning a potential defeat into an unexpected victory. "Our strength is our ability to transform," he told his team. The words were a far cry from the arrogant prince who had first arrived months earlier. The mission's final hours became a testament to human and alien potential. Zarevex used his enhanced Krell capabilities not as a weapon of individual superiority, but as a tool of collective survival. He was no longer a royal commander. He was a leader in the truest sense of the word. As the simulation concluded, the impossible had been achieved. Mission objectives were not just met, they were transcended. Commander Rodriguez's final assessment was brutal in its simplicity. He's no longer just a student. He's become something entirely new. The ultimate proving ground had revealed a fundamental truth. True potential knows no genetic, cultural, or species-based limitations. The Krell High Council chamber fell into a stunned silence as Prince Zarevex began his presentation. Holographic displays flickered with data that challenged centuries of genetic and military doctrine. Evidence gathered during his Earth training that would either revolutionize or destroy the Krell Imperium's entire social structure. Gone was the arrogant royal who had left months earlier. In his place stood a transformed leader, his once rigid exoskeleton now modified to reflect a more fluid, adaptive design. Each movement spoke of a new understanding. A living metaphor for the cultural revolution he was about to unleash. "Our greatest weakness," Zarevex began, "has been our belief in predetermined potential." The council members, genetic elite who had ruled the Imperium for millennia, shifted uncomfortably. Elder Magistrate Cranvox, the most senior of the Genetic Lineage Council, looked particularly troubled. The prince's presentation was a systematic deconstruction of Krell military and social philosophy. He revealed how human training methods had demonstrated that adaptability trumped genetic programming. Each slide showed examples of human military and social achievements that defied every Krell calculation of potential. Most provocative was his proposal for a complete restructuring of Krell military and social systems. No more rigid genetic castes, no more predetermined life paths. Instead, a dynamic system that valued individual potential, creativity, and collective growth. "We have been limiting ourselves," Zarevex declared, believing that genetic enhancement was the pinnacle of evolution, when true potential lies in our ability to adapt, to learn, to transform. Behind the scenes, Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson and Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the transmission from Earth, their communication encrypted but their anticipation palpable. The Council's initial response was predictably hostile. Elder Magistrate Cranvox stood, his massive form blocking the holographic display. "You suggest we dismantle the very foundation of our civilization." Zarevex's response was calm, calculated. He activated a series of comparative studies. Krell military performance versus human adaptive strategies. The data was irrefutable. In every scenario that required complex problem-solving, creativity, and rapid adaptation, human teams outperformed genetically enhanced Krell units. But the prince had prepared more than just data. He had prepared a living demonstration. A group of carefully selected junior Krell officers, trained using modified human methodologies, entered the chamber. Their demonstration was nothing short of revolutionary. Where traditional Krell training produced rigid, predictable responses, these soldiers showed unprecedented levels of creativity, team cohesion, and adaptive thinking. The turning point came unexpectedly. When Elder Magistrate Cranvox challenged the prince's findings, one of the junior officers, a low-caste individual who would have never spoken in such a setting before, provided a nuanced, brilliant counter-argument that silenced the entire chamber. Outside the council chambers, a broader transformation was already beginning. Military units, research centers, even social education systems started to implement the radical new approach. The Krell were experiencing their first true social evolution in millennia. "This isn't about abandoning our strengths," Zeravex explained. "This is about discovering strengths we never knew we possessed." The transmission from Earth, a final message from Staff Sergeant Thompson, played at the conclusion of the presentation. His words were simple but profound. "Potential isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose to become." As the council deliberated, Prince Zeravex understood that his true mission had only just begun. He was no longer just a royal heir. He was a bridge between civilizations, a living testament to the transformative power of understanding. The revolution had started from within.